I left my jacket at the pharmacy on a Tuesday afternoon, and that small, stupid mistake is the reason I'm still alive today. My name is Earl Hutchins. I'm 64 years old, retired from 31 years as a structural engineer with the city of Denver, and until 14 months ago, I believed my son was the best thing I'd ever had a hand in building. That belief cost me nearly everything. A forgotten jacket gave it back. It started the way most ordinary Tuesdays do. My son had driven me to pick up a new blood pressure prescription. Lisinopril, nothing dramatic. The kind of medication half the men my age are on. We grabbed lunch afterward at a diner on Colfax, the kind of place with laminated menus and pie rotating slowly behind glass. He ordered the turkey melt. I had the soup. We talked about the Broncos, about his daughter's upcoming soccer tournament, about whether I should finally replace the gutters on the house. He was attentive, laughing easily, refilling my coffee without being asked. A good son. The best son. He dropped me at home around 2, said he'd call that evening, and drove off. I was halfway through the Channel 9 news when I noticed my jacket wasn't on the hook by the door. I'd left it at the pharmacy. It wasn't even a nice jacket, an old tan Carhartt I'd had for 15 years, but my late wife's phone number was still written in pen on the inside collar, the way she'd labeled things when I kept losing them, and I wasn't leaving it there. I drove back. The pharmacy was quiet that time of day. I asked the technician at the drop-off window if anyone had turned in a jacket, and she sent me to the back to ask the pharmacist directly. His name was Ben, mid-30s, had helped me before. Good kid. He found the jacket behind the consultation counter where someone had folded it neatly. I thanked him and was turning to leave when he said my name in a voice that made me stop. Mr. Hutchins. Can I ask you something? And I need you to stay calm before I do. I turned around. His expression was the kind that doesn't go with small talk. Your son was at the drop-off window for a while today after you left, he said. He said he wanted to ask questions about your lisinopril. That's normal, family members do that. But then he started asking very specific questions about drug interactions, particularly with something called digoxin, and the questions weren't general. They were very specific about dosage thresholds. I didn't understand right away. He probably just wanted to know what to watch for. I've had some dizziness. Ben looked at the counter. He was choosing his words. Mr. Hutchins, digoxin in the wrong concentration can cause cardiac arrhythmia. It can cause a heart attack that, in a man your age with blood pressure history, would look completely natural. A doctor who wasn't specifically looking wouldn't look twice. He paused. The questions he was asking weren't the questions a concerned son asks. They were the questions someone asks when they want to know how much it takes and whether it can be traced. I stood there with my jacket in my hands and I heard everything he said, and I still didn't believe it. I told myself Ben was a cautious young man, maybe overly so. Maybe he'd misread the situation. My son, who had just refilled my coffee. I could be wrong, Ben said. I hope I am. But I've been doing this for 11 years and I'd never called out a family member before. I'm not calling the police because I have no proof of anything. But I couldn't let you walk out of here without saying something. If I'm right, and I didn't say anything, I couldn't live with that. I drove home on autopilot. I don't remember 2 of the 4 miles. I sat in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. Here's the thing about suspicion when it involves someone you love. It doesn't feel like suspicion. It feels like a betrayal of your own instincts. Every time a thought formed, he asked about drug interactions. He's been offering to manage my medications. He's been unusually interested in updating my estate documents. I immediately argued myself back. He's attentive. He's always been attentive. I raised him to be attentive. But I sat at my kitchen table that night and I started writing things down. Because that's what engineers do when something doesn't add up. We document. 6 months ago, my son suggested he take over managing my prescriptions, said he was worried I'd mix something up. I'd thought it was sweet. I've always been sharp, never mixed anything up in my life. But I'd let it go because it made him feel useful. 4 months ago, he started adding supplements to a weekly pill organizer he'd set up for me. Fish oil, magnesium, CoQ10. Reasonable things. Things I hadn't asked for. 3 months ago, he brought up my will for the first time. gently the way someone brings up something they've been rehearsing. Said he just wanted to make sure I'd thought about it, that estate planning was important, that he'd found a lawyer he trusted if I needed a referral. 2 months ago, I started having episodes. Heart fluttering, fatigue that rolled in like fog, 2 mornings where I'd woken up with my pulse doing something strange. My doctor ordered an EKG. Nothing definitive. She said it could be stress, could be the blood pressure medication, could be age. Could be age. I was 63. I'm in good health. I'd run a 5K in the fall. I'd thought she was being cautious. Looking at that list in my own handwriting at 11 o'clock at night, my stomach turned to concrete. I didn't sleep. By 5 in the morning, I had made 2 decisions. I was going to call my old colleague, Don Farrell, who'd worked in liability investigation before he retired, and I was not going to let on to my son that anything had changed. Don came by that afternoon. He's a blunt man, not given to drama, which is why I trusted him. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is also something he's not given to. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You still have the pill organizer," he said. "In the bathroom cabinet. Don't touch it with your hands. Bag it. I know someone at a private lab in Aurora. Not cheap, but they're fast and they don't ask questions." I asked him if he thought I was being paranoid. He looked at me in a way that answered the question without him having to say it. The supplements were tested over 4 days. I told my son I had a plumbing issue and didn't want company. He offered twice to come over, which I noted. I ate nothing from the refrigerator he'd stocked. I ordered delivery. I slept with my phone on the nightstand. On the 4th day, Dawn called. I could tell from the first half-second of silence that I hadn't been paranoid. "Earl," he cleared his throat. "The fish oil capsules are fine, the magnesium is fine, the CoQ10 is not CoQ10, it's a compounded form of digoxin. Low dose, but cumulative. At the rate you've been taking it, in another 2 months your heart would have been under significant stress. In 3 to 4 months. In a man your age with elevated blood pressure, a cardiologist could very plausibly attribute what happened to natural cardiac event." I sat down on the floor. I didn't mean to. My legs just went. "How do I find out where he got it?" I asked. Don had contacts I didn't ask him to explain. 2 days later, he had a thread. My son's wife, my daughter-in-law, a woman I'd helped put through her nursing certification because she and my son couldn't afford it, had access through her workplace to compounding pharmacy networks. She had the knowledge and she had the access. She knew. Both of them knew. I thought about my granddaughter, 7 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with horses, had slept on my couch the month before when she had a nightmare and her parents were out. I thought about the way she called me Grandpa Earl like it was one word. I thought about how I'd sat at that kitchen table on the night my son was born and held him and felt a feeling I'd never found words for. Then I thought about the pill organizer. Don wanted me to go to the police. He laid it out the same way a man with his background would. We had a testable substance. We had a documented source chain. We had motive. I'd find out the specifics later, but real estate investments gone badly wrong. 6 figures in debt they hadn't told anyone about. My house alone worth $1.3 million in Denver's current market. We had everything. I said I needed to talk to him first. Don looked at me the way Ben, the pharmacist, had looked at me. Like he respected me too much to argue, but thought I was making a mistake. "Don't eat or drink anything he brings," Don said. "That's all I ask." I called my son and said I wanted to have dinner, just the 2 of us, that I'd been thinking about the estate stuff he'd brought up and wanted to talk through some things. He said he'd be there at 7. I could hear the particular quality of his enthusiasm, and it made me sick in a way I don't have language for. He arrived with a bottle of Cabernet and a container of chili he said he'd made from scratch. He set the wine on the counter and moved toward the stove to heat the chili, and I said, "Come sit down first. I want to talk before we eat." He sat. He was relaxed. He looked like my son. I set my phone face up on the table. Don was in his car 2 houses down, recording audio through an app we'd set up. "I know about the CoQ10, I said. The relaxed went out of his face the way air goes out of a tire. Not all at once, just gone. Dad, I had it tested. I know what was in it. I know where it came from. I watched him. I'd spent 31 years reading structural reports, looking for the flaw in the load-bearing element, the place where the math didn't hold. I was looking at it now. I want to hear it from you. That's the only reason you're sitting here and not talking to a detective. He started with denial, a short attempt. Then he looked at the table, and something shifted. The same shift I'd seen in Claire's face on the video I'd analyzed. The dropping of the mask, and he said, "We're losing everything, Dad." Then it came out. The investment properties that had collapsed in value. The private loans they'd taken to cover losses. The interest compounding faster than they could manage. His wife's student loans from a second degree they'd never told me about. The second mortgage on their house. The numbers were real. I could see that from his face, and they were catastrophic. Close to $400,000 in a hole they couldn't see out of. "You could have told me," I said. "You would have lectured us." His voice had an edge now. "You would have sat where you're sitting and told us about financial discipline and living within our means, and you would have maybe given us $20,000 and felt like a hero. $20,000, Dad. That's not help. That's an insult. So you decided to help yourselves." He didn't answer. "You decided that your financial mistakes were worth more than my life. You're 64. You've had a good life. Don't." My voice came out harder than I expected. "Don't finish that sentence. I've heard where it goes and I don't want to hear it from you." Silence. "Does she know you're here right now?" I asked. He knew I meant his wife. "She thinks I'm having dinner with you. She doesn't know that you know." "Is she home with your daughter?" He nodded. I looked at this man who had my father's jawline and my wife's eyes, and who had been putting digoxin in my supplements for months, and I tried to locate the child I remembered inside the person in front of me. I couldn't find him. Maybe he was still in there. Maybe he was gone. I didn't know. And I realized in that moment that I might never know. And that was its own kind of grief. "Get out of my house," I said, "and understand that what happens next depends entirely on what you do in the next 24 hours. He left. He didn't take the wine or the chili. I didn't call the police that night. I've thought about that decision every day since, and I still don't know if I made the right one. What I did instead was call my attorney, a woman I'd worked with for years on a property trust, and I told her everything. By the following morning, my will had been changed. The house, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it redirected. A significant portion to the Alzheimer's Association in memory of my wife who had died of it 8 years before, which I realized afterward was more pointed than I'd intended, but I didn't change it. A scholarship fund through my engineering alma mater, a donation to the Denver Rescue Mission where I'd volunteered for 3 winters running. My son and daughter-in-law, nothing. I also called Ben at the pharmacy. I want to be specific about this because it matters and because the people who knew this story kept asking. I called Ben and I told him what had happened. I told him that he had, without exaggeration, saved my life by saying something when he could have very easily said nothing. I asked him if he was in school, if he had professional goals beyond where he was. He said he'd been trying to get into a pharmacy program, that the application fees and the exam prep costs were a barrier. I told him I would cover those costs, all of them, and that if he got in, I would contribute to his tuition for the first year. He argued with me. I told him that wasn't how this worked. That part isn't complicated. He risked something, his professional comfort, the awkwardness of overstepping, because he thought a stranger's life was worth more than his own ease. That deserves to be answered in kind. 2 weeks after that conversation, I arranged to meet my son and daughter-in-law together. My attorney was present. Dawn was in the next room. I laid it out in terms they could not dispute. The lab results, the documented source chain, the recording from the dinner. I watched my daughter-in-law's face when she understood the full scope of what I had. She'd thought she was careful. She hadn't been careful enough. I told them I was not going to the police. I told them this was not mercy. Mercy is something you extend to someone who has expressed genuine remorse, and what I saw in that room was fear. fear of consequence, not sorrow for cause, which is a different thing entirely. What I was offering them was structure. They would sign legally binding affidavits drafted by my attorney confessing in full detail to what they had done. Those affidavits would be held in a sealed file. If anything happened to me, anything at all, a fall, an illness, a car accident, anything, those documents would go directly to the Denver Police Department along with every piece of evidence. I would also be informing 2 people I trusted of the file's existence, so that my son could not calculate his way around it. They would have no further contact with me unless I initiated it. They would get nothing when I died. My daughter-in-law started crying. My son sat very still. I didn't look away from either of them because I needed them to understand I meant every word. "You have a daughter," I said. "She didn't choose any of this. For her sake, I hope you find a way to become people who deserve to raise her. That's not my job anymore. That's yours." They signed the documents. That was 11 months ago. My son sent 1 email in the first month. 3 sentences, something about wanting to explain. I read it once and didn't respond. My daughter-in-law has not contacted me. I don't know how they're managing their debt, and I've stopped wondering about it. At some point, the weight of someone else's choices becomes a thing you have to set down to keep walking. My granddaughter is 8 now. I haven't seen her in almost a year, which is the part of this that doesn't resolve neatly, the part I sit with on quiet evenings when the house feels like it's holding its breath. She doesn't know any of this. She's 8. She knows that Grandpa Earl doesn't come to soccer games anymore, and her parents have told her something that I imagine is neither fully true nor fully a lie. The way adults narrate hard things to children who aren't ready for the whole story. I hope someday she gets the whole story. I hope by then she has enough distance from it to understand that some things break even when everyone involved still loves someone on the other side of the break. My heart symptoms resolved within 3 weeks of stopping the supplements. The flutter, the fatigue, the strange mornings, gone. My doctor ran a full cardiac workup 6 weeks after and found nothing of concern. She said I was remarkably healthy for my age. I thanked her and didn't explain. I still go to the Colfax diner on Tuesdays sometimes. Old habit. I have the soup. I sit by the window and I watch the afternoon traffic, and I think about the particular smallness of the thing that saved me. A jacket, an inside collar, a pen-written phone number from a woman who has been gone 8 years and who apparently still had one more thing to do for me. I'm not a superstitious man. I'm an engineer. But I'll tell you honestly that I've stopped trying to explain that part away. Ben started his PharmD program in the fall. He sent me a message when he got his acceptance letter. I have it printed out and folded in my desk drawer, which I recognize as a sentimental thing for a structural engineer to admit, but here we are. The house is paid off. The gutters still need replacing, which my son had offered to help me with last spring, and which I will now get done by a contractor. Small thing. I think about it sometimes, how the ordinary maintenance of a life can become entangled with the people in it, and how you have to relearn to manage the ordinary things alone when those people are gone. It takes longer than you'd expect. It's more specific than you'd expect. It's not just grief in the abstract. It's grief for the particular, for the Tuesday afternoon and the turkey melt and the coffee refilled without being asked. People ask me sometimes, when I've told parts of the story, whether I regret not going to the police. And I tell them the truth, which is, I don't know. I know what the argument for it is. I made it to myself in the middle of several nights. If my son is capable of this, who else is he capable of doing it to? What happens when the next financial crisis comes and he's looking at the situation from the same place, but without a pharmacist who notices the wrong questions? Those thoughts don't leave. I've made my peace with not having an answer. What I know is that I'm still here. I'm still having soup on Tuesdays and watching the traffic and living the life I earned. My money will go to people who need it and causes that matter, and one young man in a PharmD program who proved that doing the right thing is still something people do, even when no one would know the difference if they didn't. I'm Earl Hutchins. I'm 64 years old. I forgot a jacket in a pharmacy, and it is the best thing I ever forgot. And wherever you're listening from tonight, take care of who you trust. Take care of what you drink, And if you ever see something that doesn't feel right, say something." Ben said something. It cost him 30 seconds of discomfort, and it gave me back the rest of my life. I keep thinking about the jacket. Not the pills, not the lab results, not the conversation at my kitchen table where my son's mask came off. The jacket. A 15-year-old Carhartt with my late wife's handwriting on the inside collar. I almost didn't go back for it, almost talked myself into picking it up the next day. And if I had, I wouldn't be here to tell you any of this. I don't think that's coincidence exactly, but I also don't think it's fate in any grand spiritual sense. I think it's cause and effect, the same principle I spent 31 years applying to load-bearing structures. Every outcome has a chain. Pull any link out and the shape of what follows changes completely. The chain that saved my life ran through a forgotten jacket, a pen-written phone number, and a young pharmacist named Ben who had every reason to stay quiet and chose not to. That's the thing I come back to most. Ben didn't have to say a word. He could have handed me the jacket and sent me on my way and told himself it wasn't his business. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have even known. But he understood, without anyone having to tell him, that doing right by another person is not contingent on whether that person can ever repay you or even thank you properly. That's what I'd call genuine moral character, not the kind that performs itself publicly, but the kind that holds in the private moment when no one is watching and the easier path is right there. My son had intelligence. I never doubted that. He understood pharmacology well enough to research a compound most doctors don't screen for. He understood real estate, investment structures, compounding interest, all of it. But intelligence pointed in the wrong direction doesn't build anything. It only makes the collapse more precise. What he was missing wasn't information. It was the willingness to use his mind in service of something honest, to sit across from me and say, "Dad, I'm in serious trouble," instead of calculating the dosage that would make trouble disappear. And I think about what it took for me to get through those 4 days waiting for the lab results. I'm not a man who is easily frightened. I've managed project failures. I've buried a wife. I've rebuilt a life more than once. But sitting in my own kitchen eating delivery food because I couldn't trust what was in my refrigerator, that required something I had to dig for. The discipline to not tip my hand. The steadiness to keep texting my son normally, asking how my granddaughter's soccer practice went. Why Don had a pill organizer sitting in a lab in Aurora. That kind of endurance isn't dramatic. It's just quiet and grinding and necessary. And you either find it in yourself, or you don't. I found it, and because I found it, I got to the other side of this still standing. What I want you to take from my story is not fear. Fear of your family, fear of the people who bring you coffee and groceries and small kindnesses. That's no way to live. What I want you to take is attention. Pay attention to what doesn't add up. Trust the instinct that says something is slightly wrong before you have any evidence that something is very wrong. And if you're in the position Ben was in, if you see something that doesn't sit right, something that a stranger might dismiss as none of your concern, say something anyway. It costs almost nothing to say something. It cost Ben 30 seconds of professional discomfort. It gave me the rest of my life. That's the only math that matters.